Liam clicked the button, and the transfer was complete. Payment confirmation, the screen read in sterile green letters. For the 48th and final time, a significant sum of money left his account and flew across the digital ether to the bursar's office of a prestigious school of architecture on the opposite coast. A quiet satisfaction settled in his chest, a feeling as solid and carefully constructed as one of his own designs. He leaned back in his chair, the leather sighing softly in the silent, cavernous space of his home office. The office, like the rest of his house, was a study in minimalist precision, clean lines, natural materials, and an astonishing lack of clutter. It overlooked a sprawling, manicured garden that tumbled down towards a private stretch of coastline, the waves of the Pacific whispering against the shore. 4 years. It felt both like a lifetime and the blink of an eye. 4 years since Clara had stood in the doorway of their old, much smaller apartment, her face a mask of pity and condescension. "I can't do this anymore, Liam," she had said, her voice devoid of the warmth he had once cherished. "I need more. You're comfortable. You're stagnant. You have no ambition." Behind her, Julian had been waiting by his gleaming silver sports car, a caricature of success with his slick-back hair and offensively expensive watch. He was a man who wore his wealth like armor, and Clara was desperate to share in its protection. Liam hadn't argued. He hadn't pleaded. He had simply watched the woman he'd loved for a decade dismantle their life with a few choice words, packing her aspirations into designer luggage and leaving behind the quiet, unassuming man she believed she had outgrown. What she didn't know, what no one knew, was that just 1 week before she delivered her final verdict on his potential, Liam had signed the final papers on a deal that was the very antithesis of stagnation. He had sold his boutique architectural firm, a company he had built from the ground up with a revolutionary approach to sustainable design, to a global conglomerate for a sum that had 9 figures. He had done it quietly, through lawyers and shell corporations, insisting on an anonymity clause that was ironclad. He was tired of the business side of things, the endless meetings and compromises. He wanted to get back to the purity of design, to create without constraint. The sale had given him not just wealth, but freedom. He had planned to tell Clara. He had imagined it for weeks, the champagne, the surprise, the look on her face when she realized the comfortable life she worried about was about to become extraordinary. He wanted to build her the house of her dreams, a masterpiece of glass and light perched on the very cliff where he now lived alone. But her preemptive strike had changed everything. Her pronouncement of his failure, delivered with such casual cruelty, had frozen the words in his throat. In that moment, he saw that her love was conditional, tethered not to him, but to an idea of him, to a projection of status and success. Revealing his newfound fortune then would have felt like a desperate plea, a bribe to make her stay, and his dignity, he discovered, was worth more than her affection. So he let her go. He let her believe she was leveling up, leaving her stagnant husband for a high-flying investment banker. He let her parents, Richard and Eleanor, nod in solemn agreement, their disappointment in him thinly veiled. "Clara has always been a star," Eleanor had told him, her hand patting his arm in a gesture that was meant to be kind, but felt like a dismissal. "She needs someone who can keep up with her." Richard, a man who ran a moderately successful construction company, simply looked at Liam as if he were a blueprint for a failed project. The only loose thread was Maya, Clara's younger sister. Bright, earnest, and 16 years old when the divorce happened, Maya was the one person in the family who had looked at Liam with genuine sadness, not pity. "I'm sorry, Liam," she had whispered to him, hugging him tightly as Clara loaded the last of her boxes into Julian's car. A week later, just as he was beginning to navigate the strange, empty landscape of his new life, he received his first tuition bill for Maya's pre-college architecture program, a bill he and Clara had always intended to split. He had made a promise to Maya years ago, seeing a spark of his own passion in her sketchbook. You get into a good school, he'd told her, and I'll make sure you get through it. He looked at the bill. He could have ignored it. He could have forwarded it to Clara and her new, wealthy partner. It was their responsibility now. But a promise was a structure. It had foundations, load-bearing walls, a roof. It was meant to stand. Betraying his promise to Maya because of Clara's betrayal felt like a collapse of his own internal architecture. So he paid it. And for the next 4 years, as Maya progressed from that summer program to one of the best architectural universities in the country, he continued to pay every single semester without a word to anyone but her. It was a silent contract, a quiet rebellion against the narrative they had all written for him. He was the failure, the stagnant man left behind. Yet he was the one building a future. Now it was done. She was graduating, a cum laude graduate of the College of Environmental Design. He closed the laptop, the screen going dark, reflecting his own calm expression. The past 4 years had been a masterclass in patience. He had endured the family gatherings, the condescending questions, the pitying looks. He had played the part they had assigned him. But parts, like projects, eventually come to an end. And a graduation, he thought with a ghost of a smile, was also a commencement, a beginning. We hope you're enjoying this story so far. It's a journey about hidden strength and the quiet power of integrity. If you're finding yourself invested in Liam's story, please take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more tales of satisfying reversals and emotional depth. We love knowing where our stories are reaching, so drop a comment and let us know what city or country you're watching from. Now let's get back to the quiet before the storm and see how the first cracks begin to show in the facade of Clara's new life. The first real test of his resolve came 6 months after the divorce. Eleanor was turning 60, and a party was being held at her and Richard's sprawling, slightly dated suburban home. Liam had no desire to go, but Maya had called him personally. "Please come, Liam," she'd pleaded. "It won't be the same without you. It already isn't." Her voice was the only one from that family that didn't carry a hint of judgment. For her, he would endure it. He arrived in his modest 10-year-old sedan, a car he kept specifically for such occasions. It was perfectly maintained, but projected exactly the image they expected of him. He parked on the street, half a block away from the lineup of luxury vehicles in the driveway. Julian's new black Porsche, Richard's ostentatious Cadillac Escalade, and a dozen other Beamers and Benzes belonging to their friends. He felt a flicker of amusement. It was like a car show for the insecure. Walking up the familiar stone path, he could hear the sound of forced laughter and clinking glasses. He took a deep breath, straightened the collar of his simple, well-worn blazer, and stepped into the lion's den. The moment he entered, a hush fell over the small group by the door. It was Clara, Julian, and her parents. Clara's face tightened. Julian smirked, a look of triumphant ownership in his eyes, as he slid an arm around Clara's waist. "Liam," Eleanor said, recovering first. She glided over and gave him an air kiss that landed somewhere near his ear. "So good of you to come. We weren't sure you would." The implication was clear. Why would he want to face what he had lost? "Happy birthday, Eleanor," he said, handing her a small, elegantly wrapped gift. It was a rare, first-edition book on landscape architecture he knew she'd once mentioned wanting. "Oh, how thoughtful," she said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes as she passed it off to Richard to place on the gift table, already groaning under the weight of designer boxes. Richard clapped him on the shoulder, a gesture that felt more like a shove. "Good to see you, son. Still holding up?" His gaze swept over Liam's attire, a silent, unflattering inventory. "Clara tells us you're doing some freelance work. Keeping busy, eh?" "I am," Liam said calmly. "I enjoy the work." Julian, who had been observing this exchange with the smug patience of a predator, finally spoke. "Freelance is tough," he said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "Feast or famine. I'm always telling Clara how lucky we are to have stability. The markets are on fire right now. Just closed a merger that netted the firm, well, let's just say my bonus this year will have a lot of zeros." He winked at Clara, who preened under his gaze. "That's wonderful for you, Julian," Liam replied, his tone even. He refused to take the bait. He refused to let them see any reaction other than polite indifference. His emotional expenditure was a currency he would not waste on them. Clara, perhaps frustrated by his placid demeanor, decided to twist the knife. "Liam's never been one for the corporate world," she said to Julian, but her words were aimed squarely at her ex-husband. "He prefers his smaller, more artistic projects. It's admirable in its own way, just not very practical." The humiliation was a tangible thing, a heavy cloak they were trying to drape over his shoulders. He could feel the eyes of their friends on him, the whispers starting up. He was the evening's cautionary tale. The man who couldn't keep his brilliant wife, the man who was freelancing while her new partner conquered the financial world. He felt a familiar object in his pocket. It wasn't a key or a document, but a small, smooth stone he'd picked up from the beach below his new home. He had started carrying it as a tactile reminder of his own reality, a solid, tangible truth to hold on to when their fiction became too loud. He rolled it between his thumb and forefinger, its coolness grounding him. Just then Maya appeared, a bright light in the stuffy room. "Liam, you came!" She rushed over and gave him a genuine, warm hug. "I saved you a seat on the patio." She shot a glare at her sister and Julian, a silent rebuke that went unnoticed or, more likely, was ignored. She grabbed his hand and pulled him away from the circle of condescension, leading him through the French doors into the cool evening air. "Don't listen to them," she said, her brow furrowed with concern as she handed him a drink. "They're being awful." "I don't," he said, and it was the truth. Their words were like stones thrown at a fortress. He could hear the impact, but the walls were too thick, too deep to ever be breached. "How are your classes?" Her face lit up, and for the next hour they talked about design, about form and function, about the challenges of her latest project. He listened, offered advice, and felt a sense of purpose that no financial victory could ever provide. He was building something more important than a portfolio. He was helping to build a person, an artist. Later, as he was preparing to leave, Julian cornered him by the gift table. "Listen, Liam," he said, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial tone. "No hard feelings about any of this, right? It's just how things go. But if you ever find yourself in a tight spot with that freelance stuff, I know some guys. Could probably throw you a bone. A little drafting work, maybe? Nothing glamorous, but it pays the bills." It was the pinnacle of arrogance, the ultimate expression of his perceived superiority. The man who was a minnow in the world of real finance was offering a whale a piece of plankton. The sheer, unadulterated hubris of it was almost breathtaking. Liam looked at Julian, a man so blinded by the glare of his own cheap jewelry that he couldn't see the mountain standing before him. For the first time that evening, Liam felt a genuine smile touch his lips. It was a smile of pure, delicious irony. "Thank you, Julian," he said, his voice soft and measured. "I'll be sure to keep that in mind." He walked out of the house, got into his unassuming car, and drove away, the cool, smooth stone feeling warm in his hand. The cost of admission to that party had been a few hours of his time and a book. The satisfaction he felt was priceless. Another year bled into the next, a slow procession of seasons marked by the steady rhythm of tuition payments and the occasional, unavoidable family gathering. Christmas was the next crucible. The family convened at Clara and Julian's new penthouse apartment, a space that screamed new money with its ostentatious furniture and generic expensive art. The view of the city was magnificent, but the apartment itself had no soul. It felt like a hotel suite, a temporary declaration of arrival rather than a home. Liam had once again attended for Maya, who was home for the holidays. He brought a bottle of wine that cost more than most people's weekly groceries, but its label was so obscure and understated that he knew they would dismiss it as cheap. He was not wrong. Eleanor took one look at it and said, "Oh, how nice, Liam. We'll save this for a casual evening." She then pointedly opened a bottle of champagne that Julian had been boasting about all afternoon. The primary topic of conversation was Richard's business. His construction company, a source of immense family pride for decades, was in the midst of bidding on a massive municipal contract to build a new city library complex. It was a make-or-break project that would either secure the company's future for the next decade or signal the beginning of its decline. Richard spoke of it with a blustering confidence that felt brittle. "The competition is fierce," he announced to the room, puffing out his chest. "But they don't have our history. They don't have our reputation. The mayor himself knows the quality of our work." "It's a done deal, Dad," Clara said, waving a dismissive hand. "Julian's been networking with some people on the city council. He's been putting in a good word." Julian, leaning back with a proprietary air, nodded. "It's all about who you know. The technicals of the bid are secondary. You have to play the game. Liam wouldn't understand. It's a bit more complex than designing a new sunroom for some dentist." The jab was met with a few sycophantic chuckles from their friends. Liam, seated on an uncomfortable, angular sofa, simply took a slow sip of his champagne. He happened to know a great deal about the library project. The lead architect, a celebrated designer named Alistair Finch, was an old colleague. Liam had even reviewed Alistair's preliminary designs as a personal favor, offering a few structural suggestions that Alistair had called game-changing. He also knew that the city's bidding process was now governed by a new, brutally objective scoring system designed to eliminate exactly the kind of backroom influence Julian was bragging about. Richard's reputation and Julian's networking would be utterly worthless. Richard's bid would be judged on two things alone: cost-effectiveness and the quality of the proposed architectural partnership. And Liam knew for a fact that Richard's firm had partnered with a second-rate architectural group known for cutting corners. He said nothing. It was not his place. It was not his battle. He just observed, a silent anthropologist studying a tribe on the brink of a self-inflicted disaster. Later, while he and Maya were looking at the city lights from the balcony, she spoke quietly. "Grandpa's really stressed," she said. "He's trying not to show it, but I see him on the phone at all hours. He sounds angry." "Big projects are always stressful," Liam said gently. "It's more than that," she insisted, her young face etched with worry. "He keeps talking about how everything is changing, how the old ways don't work anymore." She paused, then looked at him, her eyes searching. "Your old firm, they would have been perfect for a project like this. Your designs were always so smart and beautiful." "Thank you, Maya," he said, his voice thick with a sudden rush of affection. "That means a lot. Do you ever miss it, having the big company?" Liam considered the question. "I miss the work," he admitted. "I don't miss the business." He looked out at the glittering cityscape, a vast and complex structure of steel, glass, and human ambition. "Sometimes it's better to build quietly." His conversation with Maya was the only moment of genuine connection in an evening thick with posturing and anxiety. As he left, Clara caught him at the door. "I hope you weren't too bored tonight, Liam," she said, her tone suggesting he was incapable of understanding the high-stakes world they now inhabited. "It must all seem a bit much for you." "It was very educational," he replied, meeting her gaze without a trace of irony. And it was. He was learning just how deep their blindness went. They stood at the edge of a precipice, admiring the view, completely unaware of the unstable ground beneath their feet. He drove home, the quiet hum of his old car a soothing counterpoint to the shrill notes of their arrogance. That night he logged into his private investment portal, a custom-built interface that managed a portfolio larger than the GDP of a small country. He initiated the spring semester tuition payment for Maya, then opened a new, encrypted file on his desktop. He titled it, Ethelred Holdings, Project Library. He began to sketch, his digital pen flying across the tablet. A new library, not for the city, but for himself. A thought experiment, a quiet act of creation in the face of their impending destruction. The new year brought with it a chilling win for Richard's company. As Liam had anticipated, the library contract was awarded to a competitor, a leaner, more modern firm that had partnered with Alistair Finch's group. The City Council's press release made a point of praising the winning bid's innovative design and superior cost analysis, a clear, if unspoken, rebuke to the old guard. Richard's company had not just lost, it had been publicly declared obsolete. The news sent shockwaves through the family. Richard's blustering confidence evaporated, replaced by a sour, simmering rage. The loss of the contract wasn't just a financial blow, it was an existential one. It triggered a cascade of failures. Lenders grew nervous, lines of credit were tightened, and smaller projects which had been neglected in the all-out push for the library began to suffer from mismanagement. The next family gathering was Easter lunch, and the atmosphere was toxic. The grand dining room of Richard and Eleanor's home, usually a stage for cheerful pronouncements, felt like a wake. Richard sat at the head of the table, his face ashen, barely touching his food. Eleanor's attempts at bright conversation fell into cavernous silences. Julian, whose much vaunted influence had proven utterly useless, was defensive. "It was political," he grumbled, stabbing at a piece of ham. "The whole process was rigged from the start. They wanted a new face, someone trendy. Substance doesn't matter anymore." Clara, ever her new partner's defender, chimed in. "Exactly. Dad's company has been a pillar of this community for 40 years. It's insulting. They gave it to that flashy Alistair Finch. His designs are all glass and nonsense. No practicality." Liam, who had been listening quietly, felt a muscle twitch in his jaw. He had immense respect for Alistair's work, and he knew the nonsense Clara was referring to was a groundbreaking geothermal heating system and a light harvesting atrium that would cut the building's energy costs by 60%. It wasn't flashy, it was brilliant. "Sometimes," Liam said, his voice calm and measured, "new methods are required to solve new problems." All heads turned to him. It was the first time he had offered an opinion on the matter, and they looked at him as if a piece of furniture had just spoken. Richard slammed his fork down on the table. "New methods? What would you know about it? You build decks for suburbanites. We're talking about $100 million projects. We're talking about the real world, Liam, a world you decided you weren't cut out for." The attack was raw, fueled by fear and wounded pride. "Dad, calm down," Clara said, though she shot Liam a look of pure venom. "He doesn't understand." The conversation devolved from there, a litany of blame aimed at the economy, at city politics, at changing tastes, at everyone and everything except their own hubris and failure to adapt. Liam became the silent, unwilling scapegoat for their frustration. His quiet presence, his infuriating calm, seemed to mock their frantic anxiety. He was the ghost of a simpler past they had gleefully abandoned, and his apparent contentment was an insult to their current misery. The breaking point came after the meal. Clara cornered him in the hallway as he was preparing to leave. Her face was a pinched, desperate mask. "Liam," she began, her tone shifting from accusatory to transactional. "I need to ask you something." He waited. "Things are a little tight for Mom and Dad right now. The business, this library thing has really hit them hard. They have some cash flow issues." She took a breath, struggling to arrange the words. "They need some capital to tide them over. A loan. Not much, just, say, 50,000? To you, it's probably a lot, I know. But if you could just—" He stared at her, genuinely stunned. The audacity was breathtaking. After years of mockery and condescension, after being branded a failure with no ambition, she was now asking him for money, and not just asking, but framing it in the most insulting way possible. as a sum that would be a stretch for him, a favor he should be flattered to provide. He thought of the 9 figures sitting in his accounts. He thought of the dividends his investments had generated just that morning, a sum that could buy and sell Richard's entire failing company several times over. He thought of the smooth, cool stone in his pocket. He looked directly into Clara's expectant eyes. "I'm sorry, Clara," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "I can't." Her face hardened. "You can't, or you won't. Don't tell me you don't have it. A man as comfortable as you must have some savings squirreled away." "I have obligations," he said simply, the words hanging in the air. "Obligations?" she scoffed. "What obligations? You have no one, Liam. A small apartment, a beat-up car. What could you possibly be spending your money on?" The opening was there. He could have told her. He could have said, "I'm spending it on your sister's education. An education that costs more than the loan you're asking for. An obligation I took on when you abandoned yours." He could have ended the charade right there. But it wasn't time. The structure wasn't complete. This was just another stress test. He needed to see it through to the end. "My finances are my own concern, Clara," he said softly, "but I'm afraid I can't help your parents." Her face contorted with rage. "I knew it," she hissed. "I knew you were petty. This is revenge, isn't it? Because I left you. You're happy to see them fail. You're pathetic." She turned and stormed away, leaving him alone in the hallway. He didn't feel anger. He didn't feel vindication. He felt a profound and weary sadness. She hadn't seen him as a person. She had seen him as a resource to be tapped. And when he'd refused, he had become an obstacle to be vilified. He quietly let himself out of the house, the spring air doing little to clear the toxic chill of the afternoon. The graduation was just over a year away. He knew with absolute certainty that everything would change then. It had to. The final year was a slow, agonizing descent for Clara's family. Richard's company entered a death spiral. He laid off longtime employees, sold off equipment for pennies on the dollar, and took out high-interest loans from predatory lenders just to make payroll. The grand family home, once a symbol of their status, was quietly put on the market, though they told friends they were simply downsizing. Julian, the financial wizard, was conspicuously absent. His promises of connecting Richard with investors evaporated. "The market's too volatile," he'd claim, or "my capital is tied up in a long-term play." The truth, Liam suspected, was that Julian's success was as much of a facade as his personality, and he had no real capital to offer. Liam watched from a distance, his only connection to the family's implosion being Maya's occasional, worried emails. She was shielded from the worst of it by her demanding curriculum, but she sensed the growing desperation in her mother's phone calls. "They sound so stressed, Liam," she wrote. "Mom keeps asking me if I've thought about student loans, or if the school has any work-study programs. Is everything okay?" Liam would reassure her. "Focus on your finals," he'd write back. "Your only job right now is to finish what you started. Don't worry about anything else." With each email, he offered her encouragement and mentorship on her final thesis project, a stunning design for a self-sufficient community arts center. He saw his own early passion reflected in her work, refined and amplified. He was more proud of her than he could say. He made the final tuition payment in early May. The confirmation email arrived, as always. But this time, it was followed by another email a few days later. It was from the university president's office. An official invitation to the graduation ceremony and a special luncheon for honors graduates. Maya's name was on the list. And at the bottom of the invitation, a handwritten note from Maya herself. "Liam, I wouldn't have made it here without you. Please be there. It would mean the world to me. You have to be in the front row." He RSVP'd immediately. He booked a flight and a room at a quiet, elegant hotel near the campus. He then made another call, this one to his tailor. He needed a new suit. Not something flashy or ostentatious, something simple, classic and perfect. A suit that spoke not of wealth, but of substance. A suit made of quiet confidence. In the weeks leading up to the graduation, the desperation from Clara's family reached a fever pitch. He received a call from Eleanor. Her voice, usually so imperious, was thin and pleading. "Liam," she began, dispensing with any pleasantries. "Richard and we need to talk to you. It's about the house. The sale is falling through, and the bank—" She trailed off, her voice cracking. "We remembered what you said at Easter about your obligations. But surely you could spare something. For old time's sake. We're family." "Eleanor," he said, his voice gentle but unyielding, "I told Clara my position has not changed. I'm sorry for the difficulties you're facing, but I cannot get involved." "But why?" she cried, the word a raw wound. "After all we did for you when you were with Clara, we welcomed you." He thought about the years of subtle condescension, the constant reminders of his perceived inadequacy. He thought about her dismissing his thoughtful gift at her birthday party. Their definition of welcoming him was allowing him to orbit their brilliant daughter, a privilege for which he was expected to be eternally grateful. "I have to go, Eleanor," he said, ending the conversation before it could devolve further. He hung up the phone, the silence of his vast, empty house pressing in on him. He felt no triumph, only a deep sense of melancholy. This was the endgame of a life built on appearances. When the facade crumbled, there was nothing left but dust and desperation. His final communication before the graduation was a short, formal email he sent from an anonymous, encrypted address. It was addressed to the personal inbox of Julian's boss, the CEO of his investment firm. The email contained a single, heavily researched file. It was a detailed forensic analysis of several of Julian's recent successful mergers, highlighting a pattern of unethical, borderline illegal practices, including misrepresentation of assets and insider trading. Liam had commissioned the report months ago from a team of private investigators and financial analysts. He had been holding on to it, a trump card he wasn't sure he would ever play. But Julian's cruelty, his smug enjoyment of Liam's supposed failure, had tipped the scales. This wasn't about revenge on Clara. It was about consequences for Julian. It was a simple, clean act of justice. He pressed send. The file flew into the digital void, a silent torpedo heading for the hull of Julian's career. He knew he would likely never see the explosion, but he would feel its shockwaves. A few days later, he boarded his flight. He carried a single, small suitcase. In his jacket pocket, he had the graduation invitation and the smooth, cool stone from the beach. He was not going there as a rescuer or a conqueror. He was going as a witness. He was going to watch a promise be fulfilled and to see a chapter of his life finally, definitively, close. The air in the cabin was pressurized and stale, but as he looked out the window at the clouds below, he felt a sense of clarity and lightness. The storm was about to break. The day of the graduation was bright and oppressively sunny, the kind of perfect California day that feels like a taunt when your world is falling apart. Liam arrived on campus early, wanting to walk the grounds and absorb the atmosphere. The university was a masterpiece of landscape architecture, a place where buildings and nature conversed in a beautiful, flowing language. He felt a sense of peace here, a rightness. This was a place of creation, of beginnings. He wore the new suit. It was a deep charcoal gray, tailored to perfection. Paired with a simple white shirt and no tie, it was the epitome of understated elegance. It was armor, but an armor of self-assurance, not of ostentation. He made his way to the vast outdoor amphitheater where the ceremony was to be held. He found his seat easily, front row, center, just as Maya had requested. A few minutes later, he saw them arrive. Clara, Julian, Richard, and Eleanor. They looked like a photograph that had been left out in the sun, their colors faded, their edges curled. Richard's face was a roadmap of sleepless nights. Eleanor's smile was a brittle, painted-on thing. Clara's expensive dress hung on her as if on a stranger. Her usual vibrant energy was replaced by a tense, nervous exhaustion. And Julian looked like a man who had seen a ghost. His face was pale and clammy, his eyes darting around as if expecting an ambush at any moment. The torpedo had hit. Liam could see it in the tremor in his hands, and the way he kept checking his phone, his expression growing darker with each glance. They saw him. Their collective gaze swept over him, and for a moment, they seemed confused. He did not look like the man they thought they knew. The pathetic, down-on-his-luck freelancer did not fit with the image of the man sitting in the front row, looking as if he owned the very ground the university was built on. They exchanged uneasy glances, then chose a small cluster of seats a few rows back, a physical distance that mirrored the emotional chasm between them. They did not approach him. They did not speak to him. They simply sat, a miserable island of anxiety in a sea of celebrating families. The ceremony began with the usual pomp and circumstance. The procession of students, the dean's speech, the conferring of degrees. Liam watched, a placid expression on his face, but his heart was beating a steady, expectant rhythm. He saw Maya in the procession, her face glowing with a mixture of excitement and relief. She scanned the crowd, her eyes found his, and she gave him a small, brilliant smile. In that smile, he saw 4 years of hard work, 4 years of his quiet, unwavering support vindicated. Finally, the dean stepped to the podium to announce the student awards. The valedictory honor is awarded to a student who has not only achieved the highest academic standing, the dean announced, his voice booming across the amphitheater, but who has also demonstrated exceptional vision and leadership. This year, the faculty was unanimous in its decision. The valedictorian for the College of Environmental Design is Maya Thompson. A wave of applause washed over the crowd. Liam saw Eleanor and Richard manage weak, startled smiles. Clara looked genuinely shocked. They had been so consumed by their own collapse that they hadn't even realized how brightly their daughter, their sister, was shining. Maya walked to the podium, graceful and poised. She looked out at the sea of faces, took a deep breath, and began to speak. Maya's speech started conventionally enough. She thanked her professors for their guidance, her friends for their camaraderie. She spoke of the challenges and triumphs of her architectural education. "We're taught to think about structure," she said, her voice clear and confident, "about foundations and stress points and the integrity of materials. But I've learned that the most important structures aren't made of steel and concrete. They're the structures of support, of belief, and of character that allow us to build our own lives." Liam felt a swell of pride. These were her words, but they were his philosophy. He had taught her that. She then turned her gaze towards her family. "I want to thank my family, my parents, Richard and Eleanor, and my sister Clara. They taught me the importance of ambition." The words were chosen carefully, a double-edged sword that Liam knew was aimed with precision. She then paused, and her eyes scanned the front row until they landed directly on Liam. The entire amphitheater seemed to hold its breath. "But there is one other person," she continued, her voice softening but gaining a new intensity. "Someone who has been the silent, load-bearing wall of my entire education. When my life was turned upside down 4 years ago, when I thought I might have to give up on my dream, this person stepped in, quietly and without fanfare. He never asked for thanks. He never sought recognition. He simply made a promise, and he kept it. For 4 years, he has not only funded my education completely, but he has been my most trusted mentor, my fiercest advocate, and my best friend. He taught me that true strength isn't about how loudly you announce your success, but about how quietly you maintain your integrity. That person is my former brother-in-law, Liam Kent." A polite, confused applause rippled through the crowd. But in the rows behind Liam, there was a deafening silence. He could feel their stares burning into the back of his neck. He saw Clara's hands fly to her mouth. Richard looked as if he'd been struck. Julian was frozen, his face a mask of dawning horror. But Maya wasn't finished. She was just laying the foundation. Now, she was ready to build. "And so," she said, her voice ringing with newfound power, "as I graduate today, I am not entering the job market with uncertainty. Because of the skills I've learned here, and because of the confidence Liam has given me, I'm thrilled to announce that I have already accepted my dream job. Next month, I will be starting as a junior associate architect at Aethelred Holdings." The name landed in the amphitheater with the force of a physical blow. To most people, it was just a name, a prestigious one perhaps, if they were in the industry. But to a select few, it was a name whispered with awe. Aethelred Holdings was a global titan in design and development, famous for its revolutionary, large-scale sustainable projects. They were building entire cities in the desert, reimagining urban coastlines, and pioneering technologies decades ahead of the curve. And they were famous for one other thing: their founder. A mysterious, visionary figure who had emerged from nowhere a few years ago with seemingly limitless capital and a genius for design. A man who operated under the pseudonym Aethelred, and whose true identity was the most closely guarded secret in the architectural world. Liam watched as Julian's face turned from pale to a ghostly white. As an investment banker, Julian would know the name. He would know the legends surrounding the company's meteoric rise. He would know that the anonymous founder was considered a kingmaker, a veritable god in the world of architecture and high finance. Maya took one last breath, her eyes still locked on Liam's, a fierce, protective loyalty burning in them. "I can't wait to start working with the team there," she declared, "and to learn from the very best in the world, including the firm's brilliant and visionary founder." She smiled, a slow, deliberate smile that was all for Liam. "Thank you." She walked off the stage to thunderous applause. The ceremony was over. The charade was over. The quiet part was done. Liam stood up, the charcoal gray suit feeling less like armor and more like a uniform. The real commencement was about to begin. The moment the crowd began to disperse, they descended on him. It wasn't a walk, it was a charge, a desperate, clumsy scramble through the throng of happy graduates and their families. Clara was in the lead, her face a chaotic mess of confusion, disbelief, and dawning terror. Richard and Eleanor stumbled behind her, their expressions slack with shock. And Julian, his movements stiff and robotic, brought up the rear, looking like a man being marched to his own execution. "Liam," Clara's voice was a choked whisper as she finally reached him, grabbing his arm. Her touch was frantic. What was she talking about? What is Aethelred Holdings? Liam looked down at her hand on his sleeve, then met her wild eyes. He remained silent. He didn't need to speak. Julian did it for him. It's one of the biggest private development firms in the world," Julian stammered, his voice barely audible. He was looking at Liam not as a person, but as a terrifying, incomprehensible force of nature. "Their portfolio it's massive. They just bought out a controlling stake in the consortium that won the library bid." He swallowed hard. "The founder, no one knows who he is. He's called Aethelred, a ghost. He sold some tech design firm years ago for a fortune and vanished. Julian's voice trailed off as the final, impossible puzzle piece clicked into place in his mind. His eyes widened in horror. "Your firm, your little boutique firm, that was you." The accusation hung in the air, but it sounded like a prayer, a desperate plea for it not to be true. Richard, who had been staring at Liam with a dazed expression, finally found his voice. It was hoarse, raspy. "Is it true, Liam? Are you Aethelred?" This was the moment, the culmination of 4 years of patience, the quiet, methodical construction of this very scene. Liam looked at the four of them, the architects of his humiliation, now standing before him as beggars at a feast they hadn't known he was hosting. He felt no anger. He felt no glee. He felt only the quiet, immense gravity of the truth. "Yes," he said. The word was simple, devastating, final. Clara recoiled as if he had slapped her. She let go of his arm and took a step back, her whole body trembling. Her mind was frantically recalculating the last 4 years. Every conversation, every insult, every condescending remark. She had left the stagnant man with no ambition for a life of status and success, only to discover she had traded a mountain of solid gold for a handful of glittering dust. The irony was so immense, so crushing, it was a physical weight. "But how?" Eleanor whispered, her hand at her throat. "Your car, your apartment, you never said anything." "You never asked," Liam replied, his voice still calm, still measured. This was the moment for his list of grievances, not delivered with fire and fury, but with the chilling precision of an architect reviewing a flawed design. "You told me I was stagnant, Clara. You said I lacked ambition. You and Julian mocked my freelance work at your mother's birthday party. Do you remember, Julian? You offered to throw me a bone, some drafting work to help me pay the bills." Julian flinched, a deep, painful blush coloring his pale face. "At Christmas," Liam continued, his gaze shifting to Richard, "you told me I knew nothing of the real world, of $100 million projects. You and Clara dismissed Alistair Finch's design for the library as flashy nonsense. That nonsense, Richard, is why his bid won. And Ethelred Holdings, my company, is now financing that project." He let that sink in. The project that had ruined Richard was now being funded by the man he had scorned. It was a poetic justice so perfect it was almost cruel. "And at Easter," he said, his eyes finally settling on Clara again, "you asked me for $50,000, a sum you were sure would be a stretch for me. You called me petty and pathetic when I refused. You asked me what obligations I could possibly have." He paused, letting the weight of the unspoken answer fill the space between them. "I was paying for your sister's future, Clara, an obligation you and your parents seem to have forgotten. That tuition, over 4 years, was more than 5 times the loan you asked for." The final brick fell into place. The full, horrifying picture was complete. They had not just misjudged him. They had been standing on a platform he had built, complaining about the view, completely unaware of his hand holding them up. At that moment, Maya appeared at his side, slipping her arm through his. She said nothing, but her presence was a statement. She had made her choice. She was standing with the builder, not the wrecking crew. The silence that followed was a vacuum, sucking all the air and arrogance out of them. Clara's face, which had been a storm of emotions, finally crumbled into a single, devastating expression. Regret. A regret so profound it seemed to age her a decade in a single second. She looked at Julian, at his clammy skin and terrified eyes, and saw him for the first time not as a status symbol, but as a hollow man. Then she looked back at Liam, at his calm strength and quiet dignity, and she finally saw the man she had thrown away. The magnitude of her mistake was an abyss, and she was in freefall. Richard was the first to break, his pride utterly shattered. "Liam," he croaked, taking a clumsy step forward. "My company, it's gone. The banks are calling in everything. We're going to lose the house. Everything." His voice broke. "Please, you have to help us. You own the library project now. You could subcontract my firm, a small piece, anything, just to keep the doors open." It was the desperate plea of a drowning man, reaching for the very ship he had tried to scuttle. Eleanor, tears streaming down her face, echoed his plea. "He's right, Liam. For Maya's sake, for the family. Don't let us be ruined. We made a mistake. We were wrong, so terribly wrong." Then came Clara. She looked at Liam, her eyes swimming with tears that were, for the first time, genuine. The artifice was gone. The condescension, the pride, the arrogance, all of it had been burned away by the terrible fire of the truth. "Liam," she whispered, her voice ragged, "I am so sorry. There are no words. I was a fool, a blind, arrogant fool. I threw away the only real thing I ever had because I was chasing a fantasy. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't deserve it. But please, don't punish my parents for my mistake." She looked at Julian, who stood frozen in his own private hell, his career and his borrowed status evaporating before his eyes. "I'm leaving him," she said, the words flat and empty. It wasn't a bargaining chip. It was a statement of fact. A life raft she was abandoning because she now knew it was filled with holes. They all stared at him, their fates hanging on his next words. The humiliated man now held all the power. The failure now held their future in the palm of his hand. He could crush them. He could lift them up. He could walk away and let them crumble under the weight of their own choices. He looked at their desperate faces, and for a fleeting moment, he felt the temptation of vengeance. It would be so easy. A single word from him could erase them. But then he looked at Maya, who was watching him with absolute trust. He felt the smooth stone in his pocket, the small, solid piece of his own private world. He thought about the structures he spent his life designing, buildings meant to stand for centuries, to provide shelter, to inspire. Destruction was easy. Any fool with a hammer could do it. Building was hard. It required patience, vision, and a moral compass. He had spent 4 years building this moment, not for the sake of a satisfying collapse, but for the sake of a final, honest accounting. The accounting was done. Now a different kind of work had to begin. Liam looked at Richard, the patriarch of the family, now reduced to a pleading, broken man. He saw the years of hard work that had been poured into his company, now squandered by pride and an inability to adapt. There was a tragedy there that Liam couldn't ignore. "I will not bail out your company, Richard," Liam said, his voice quiet but firm. The flicker of hope in Richard's eyes died. A structure that is fundamentally unsound cannot be saved by patching the cracks. It needs to be rebuilt from the foundation up. Your business model is outdated, and your pride prevented you from seeing it. Pouring my money into it would be a disservice to you and to my own principles. Richard visibly deflated, the last of his hope draining away. Eleanor let out a small sob. "However," Liam continued, and a sliver of attention returned to their faces, "Aethelred has a subsidiary firm that specializes in small-scale municipal renovations. It's not glamorous work. It's repairing schools, retrofitting public buildings. The margins are thin, but the work is honest." He paused, letting the weight of his offer settle. "There is a project manager position opening up next month. The pay is modest. You would be an employee, not the boss. You would have to answer to people younger than you. But it is a job. It is a chance to work, to earn a living with dignity, and to learn the new methods you once dismissed. The choice is yours." It was not a handout. It was a lifeline, but one they would have to swim to and grab themselves. It offered survival, but at the cost of the very status they had worshipped. Richard stared at him, his mind struggling to process the offer. It was both an insult and an act of incredible grace. Liam then turned his attention to Clara. She stood apart from her parents, wrapped in the chilling isolation of her own catastrophic misjudgment. She wasn't asking for anything. Her apology had been absolute, without condition. "Clara," he said, and her head snapped up. "What you did broke something between us, something that cannot be repaired. I have spent the last 4 years building a new life, a new foundation for myself. There is no place for you in it." The words were not cruel. They were a simple statement of architectural fact. The design for his life had been redrawn. "I accept your apology because I believe it is sincere, and I forgive you." A single tear traced a path down her cheek. "You do?" she whispered. "I do," he confirmed. "Not for your sake, but for mine. Holding on to anger is like living in a house with a toxic mold. It destroys from the inside. But forgiveness does not mean reconciliation. The bridge between our worlds is gone. I hope you find what you are looking for, Clara. I truly do. But I hope you learn to look for it in here, he said, tapping his own chest lightly, and not out there. He glanced briefly at Julian, who looked as if he might be physically ill. Julian, realizing the conversation was over for him, turned and walked away without a word, a hollow man disappearing into the crowd. Finally, Liam looked at Eleanor. "You will not lose your home," he said simply. "I will buy the mortgage from the bank. I will not forgive the debt, but I will restructure it. You will make payments to me at a rate you can afford based on Richard's new salary, should he choose to accept my offer. You will keep your home, but you will be reminded every month of the true cost of your choices." It was a masterstroke of justice and mercy. He was not letting them off the hook, but he was not letting them drown either. He was forcing them to live with the consequences, to participate in their own slow, difficult redemption. He had said all that needed to be said. The final accounting was complete. He turned to Maya, who had watched the entire exchange with a look of profound admiration. "Are you ready to go, colleague?" he asked, a warm smile finally breaking through his stoic expression. "More than ready," she said, her voice filled with emotion. She squeezed his arm. They turned and walked away, leaving the remnants of the family to process the new reality he had constructed for them. They walked through the jubilant campus, a world away from the drama that had just unfolded. The air felt lighter, cleaner. "You were incredible, Liam," Maya said, her voice full of awe. "You didn't destroy them." "Destruction is easy," he said, repeating the thought he'd had earlier. "It's not my craft. My craft is building, and sometimes that means clearing a site before you can start something new." He looked at her, his pride in her shining in his eyes. "Your speech was quite the piece of work, by the way. The importance of ambition. A nicely placed stiletto." She grinned. "I learned from the best. You taught me that the most elegant designs often have the sharpest lines." They reached his waiting car, not the old sedan, but a sleek, dark Tesla he'd had delivered from his hotel. He opened the door for her, and as she got in, he looked back one last time. He saw Richard talking to Eleanor, his shoulders no longer slumped in defeat, but squared with a new, grim determination. He saw Clara standing alone, watching them go, her expression no longer one of regret, but of quiet, painful contemplation. He had not given them what they wanted, but perhaps he had given them what they needed, a chance to rebuild on a new, more honest foundation. As he drove away from the university with his new colleague and beloved family member beside him, Liam felt the last 4 years settle into their proper place. They were not years of loss or humiliation. They were years of quiet construction, of laying a foundation for this very day. He had not only weathered the storm, he had built the harbor that would see others through it. The road ahead was clear, stretching out like a blueprint for a future he would design on his own terms, built with integrity and shared with those who understood its true value. That evening, Liam stood on the balcony of his penthouse suite, a space far grander than Clara and Julian's had ever been, though his was filled with books and original blueprints instead of gaudy furniture. Maya was on a video call with her friends, her laughter echoing from the other room, a sound of pure, unburdened joy. He looked out at the city, a glittering tapestry of light and shadow, ambition and struggle. He thought about the nature of wealth. Clara and her family had seen it as a destination, a badge to be worn. They had been so blinded by the destination that they had failed to see the journey, the work, the character required to achieve it sustainably. He had come to understand that true wealth wasn't a number in a bank account. It was freedom. The freedom to live by your own principles, the freedom to keep a promise, the freedom to be patient, the freedom to offer a hand up instead of a handout. He heard Maya end her call and come to stand beside him at the railing. "It's beautiful," she said, looking out at the view. "It is," he agreed. "What do you see?" She was quiet for a moment, thinking like the architect she now was. "I see a system," she said, "a complex network of structures, Some are strong, some are weak, some are beautiful, some are ugly. But none of them stand alone. They're all connected. They all rely on each other to hold the whole thing up. He smiled. Exactly. He knew Richard would accept the job. He knew Eleanor would make the mortgage payments. He knew Clara would begin the long, painful process of rebuilding herself into someone she could respect. He had not fixed them, but he had reintroduced them into the system, connected them back to a structure of accountability and consequence. The rest was up to them. For him, the future was bright and clear. It was a future filled with work he loved, with a family he had chosen, and with the quiet, unshakable satisfaction of a project brought to a successful, meaningful completion. He had not sought revenge, he had sought balance. And in the end, he had found it. The scales had been righted, not through anger, but through the slow, steady, and unstoppable force of integrity. And so, Liam's story comes to a close, not with a fiery explosion of vengeance, but with the quiet, satisfying click of everything falling into its rightful place. It's a powerful reminder that true strength isn't about dominance, but dignity. It teaches us that patience can be a weapon, and integrity can be a fortress. What do you think? Did Liam do the right thing by offering his former family a difficult path to redemption instead of destroying them completely? We'd love to read your thoughts in the comments below. What would you have done in his position? If this story of quiet triumph and poetic justice resonated with you, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more stories that explore the depths of human character. We believe in the power of storytelling to inspire and provoke thought, and we're so grateful to have you with us on this journey. Until next time, remember that the strongest foundations are the ones built on truth.